All right, so let's talk about picking the right exercise. Now, whenever we talk about picking the right exercise, we have to understand that whatever is the best exercise is always contextual to that of our goal. The right exercise for trying to jump high might not be the same exercise that is responsible for that of helping you swim faster. So, in this example, we're going to use a really simple goal, and that is to squat the most weight possible. And so when we start to look at what exercises are going to help us squat the most weight possible, we need to look at what muscles are working during the squat and in what context they're working. So, for example, maybe your low back is acting statically to support the load while your knee extensors and hip extensors are acting to actively lift the load. In conjunction with that, they're not just doing the movement, but they're doing it at a certain velocity, which is a slow velocity. So producing max force happens at slow velocities. Then we can even take it one step further and begin to try and find ways to assess those specific muscle groups. How strong are your quads? How strong are your glutes? How strong is your low back? And then you can assess the movement through video analysis or even just quote unquote feel and get an understanding as to what is lacking. I'm not lifting enough weight because I give out in my low back and I'm not able to maintain an upright torso. My legs aren't strong enough because I just can't lift the darn thing. So we can start to break it down, and that means that same concept of breaking down the muscles and how they're acting then lead to what exercises you will need to perform. So if I want to squat more and my quads are what's lacking, well, I need to find movements that might isolate the quadriceps more to help me lift more weight. So maybe like a belt squat would be useful. Or maybe my low back is weak, so I want to do a reverse hyper or a back extension. Or my glutes are weak, so I do a hip thruster or something of that nature. That is where we can start to break it down. Now, the important thing is this same concept applies to whatever area you're looking at. It was pioneered by Dr. Yuri Verkhoshansky, and it was called dynamic correspondence. And it's a way to look at how a movement that you are training is actually going to transfer to another movement. Because the goal is you might want to identify specific lacking areas. That is maybe your legs, your glutes, your hamstrings, your calves, whatever it might be for the movement you want to try and get better at. But then we want to find exercises that actually transfer to our goal movement. So maybe just doing seated calf raises might play a small role in developing the proper calf musculature to be a good sprinter, but maybe there are more specific exercises that can be done in conjunction with, say, calf raises, like skips or hops or bounds that are, well, more transferable to that of sprinting itself. And so when it comes down to breaking down what the right exercise is, we need to take into consideration not just what the movement is and what the motor pattern of the movement is and trying to mimic that motor pattern, right? If you want to get better at squatting, I guess it's really easy to say just do squat like movements, but we also need to find ways to develop areas that are lacking and holding back our entire movement and as an entirety, right? You can't just get better at squatting by only squatting. Maybe you need to have some accessory movements to bring up the other areas that are lacking. And those accessory movements need to be picked in a way that they're actually going to transfer. So if you want to get better at squatting, just doing 1,000 knee extensions isn't going to get you better at squatting, but maybe doing heavier belt squats would have a better transfer because you're working at those velocities that are slower and heavier loads to develop maximal strength. While if you're talking about being explosive and jumping, doing depth jumps or plyometrics or even speed squats might have a higher probability of transfer because it's fulfilling the specific demands that you encounter in sport. An easy way to think about it is, am I working the right muscles, first and foremost, that are responsible for this motor action, this movement? Then you can look at and think about, are the muscles moving in the way that they typically would move, both under load and speed, and that of the sporting movement? Yes, or if not, why? And then how could that potentially then pair in with the more, my ultimate goal of this sporting movement or that of squatting to actually help me get better at that specific target goal? And so those exercises can be categorized in like the most basic area. It depends which methodology you look at and what school of thought. Anatoly Bondarchuk had specific means of labeling it, but there's kind of ideas of developmental, special exercises, and sport-specific exercises. And special developmental ones are working the right muscles in the right context. Then maybe like special specific ones are replicating-ish or closer to that of the motor pattern of the movement itself. And then the sport-specific movement as well, that sport-specific movement. An example might be for a special developmental exercise, I might say something like a belt squat. And then for a special specific exercise, it might be that of a safety bar squat. Now it's more similar in nature. And then the sport specific movement, if we're talking about squatting again, well, it's just squatting itself. But maybe if you want to have some variability with that spectrum, it's squatting to specific heights, or even like adding a pause to a squat if we just want to have a slight deviation outside of the most specific, which is that of squatting itself. So hopefully that makes sense, guys. I appreciate listening. If you have any comments or questions, let me know and comment below, and hope you all enjoy. Feel free to like, subscribe, and follow along.